Alright, and welcome back to the series about world building. World building basics. We are doing basics here for this series. We might go in more in depth on certain aspects in future videos, but for now we are covering basics. And this is gonna be about economics, economy. So this is another one of those ones that how much you need to worry about it depends entirely on the story. You know, a story that takes place in a trading culture, you can basically get away with saying that it's a trading culture. And then it's a matter really of just kind of intuitively figuring out what things would be worth to people. And then, of course, in another one, maybe you're doing a fantasy where a character is an accountant, and money might play a huge role in that story. So every story is different, and the role of the economy and economics and the form it takes, it can be very different from story to story. In this case, I think we have a couple of different, very different um, mindsets when it's going to come when it comes to economics. Obviously, an empire is going to have money. Now, there is a tendency in fantasy to just fall back on gold, silver, copper, or bronze or something. And honestly, I don't have a problem with that. It's easy to understand. You don't have to explain it to people. You might want to go ahead and give it something like gold crowns or imperials or something. So we can just go ahead and say that economy, let's just say there's imperial crowns, rods, rings, and what's the other suit in tarot? Cups. Actually, I'm not sure I have all four of those right, but that'll work. So we can simply say that as far as purchasing power, just to give yourself an idea, say that one imperial crown is worth $100, let's say. Is worth, say, $25. One ring is worth, say, $10. No, that doesn't make sense. Is worth $1. And one cup is worth, say, 1 cent. I can never remember how to do the cent sign. Give or take. And again, none of this is set in stone. This is just brainstorming. It's rough ideas. And this thing, you would never put this information into an actual story. Obviously, it's just there to give you personally an idea, so that when you're saying, if you were to have the character visit a settlement within the empire and they have imperial money, you would have an idea of what something would cost. You don't have to have an itemized price list for every last thing that could possibly be bought and sold. Again, that's a huge waste of time. You just need a basic idea of how much the money is worth. Okay, so then we get into Greenavik. And this is where you have to ask the question, do they still use imperial money? That's where they're originally from, at least one of the kingdoms or other nations that was taken over by the empire, but they are still fairly close to the empire. They might trade with the empire. It's just that so far that the empire has not claimed control over the entire forest, because that would be very difficult to do. It's a massive forest full of magical nasties, we'll say, which is actually part of politics and something that you would want to include in the story. And it just occurred to me, but you would have, at some point you would need to address this. Why don't they just take over the whole forest? It's a very simple question, just occurred to me that it really needed to be answered. So, it's a big forest full of dangerous, scary things, that's why. It's a good reason. Especially for an empire that's really based on intellectual conquest rather than military conquest. They have a military, but maybe not one that they feel like sending to into a huge forest to get eaten by the wee folk if they piss them off. But again, this is where you want to stop and you ask yourself some questions. A big part of your basic story building and world building process is going to be just taking a moment to ask questions. And it's the town of Greenavik is inside the forest. So maybe they don't use currency. Maybe it's more of a trading economy. But they are still close enough to the empire that they might leave the forest to go trade with imperial settlements that are nearby. They might still use imperial currency. So maybe they have a mix. Locally, they mostly just do trade. Someone might trade a pair of chickens for medicine, for example. They do usually keep some imperial currency, or rather, not just they do. Those who travel in order to trade and buy usually keep some imperial currency. Okay. So now we know that they do, some of them do keep keep some imperial currency on hand, but mostly they do trading amongst each other. And again, this is just your basic starting point. If you decide later that, no, that doesn't feel right, you could switch them entirely to using imperial currency, or perhaps they've developed their own currency of some kind. For the woodland elves, see, now this one is very difficult because this is supposed to be an established civilization, obviously. This, even though it's really just like a city built into the treetops in one part of the forest. So they could have currency, or they could still rely heavily on trade and barter. We'll say that they do have a type of currency, and it'll be kind of similar. Actually, it just popped into my head. gemstones. And you can add more details later. Just look up a list of different types of gemstones. They use gems as currency, diamonds being the most valuable. So maybe they have access to a river somewhere where a lot of gems have washed down out of a gem-rich vein in the mountains or whatever. Maybe in the past they did a lot of trade with the dwarves or whoever lives in the mountains, or they still do, perhaps. Again, you can add more details now, you can add more later. We can go ahead and say that that's what they do. Trade a lot with the mountain dwarves to the north. So instead of being enemies, these elves and dwarves actually get along with each other. And they trade, so the elves just use gems as currency because whatever it is that they're trading with the dwarves, that's how they get paid a lot of times. And other things you might want to consider for economy, things like imports and exports, anything else that has to do with economics, actual real-world economics can go into your story as well, if it's important. As always, don't waste time coming up with a complete financial report for an entire kingdom unless you actually need to have that information for some reason. Stick with what you actually need. In this case, all we really need to know is what kind of money do they use. Because most of the interactions in this story with the Empire, it's either going to be going to an Imperial settlement to trade, or dealing with the people who are trying to rip down parts of the forest, who are the antagonists. The town, it's just maybe some trade stuff will go on, and purchasing will go on between people in the town, but how much is it going to come up in the story? So don't waste time on things that are just never going to come up, or come up very little. If it's going to come up never, don't spend time on it at all. If it's only going to come up a very little bit, spend a very little bit of time on it. If it's going to come up sometimes, spend a bit of time on it. If it's going to come up a lot, spend more time on it. And if it's going to be coming up all the time, spend a lot of time on it. Okay? So I think we've covered economics, the basics of economics for world building right there. So go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment letting me know what other things you have problems with when it comes to world building. I'll either make more videos or leave a reply in the comments. And I have more resources in the description that you might want to check out, so don't forget to look at that. And thank you again for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Later.